Good morning or afternoon, and thank you to everybody for joining today's webinar, What's New in the Intacct 2016 Release 4. I'm Megan Turco, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm going to briefly go over how to use the webinar console. The orange arrow on the right side of your screen will let you toggle the control tray open or closed, and at the bottom of the control tray, you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function, and we'll get to them at the end during our Q&A session. Also on your GoToWebinar console, you should see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. Alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option. And additionally, I do want to note that today's webinar is being recorded. So of course, we will send you the slides as well as a link to the on-demand recording of the webinar within about 48 hours. So definitely keep an eye out for that message if you're interested in accessing the webinar after today or sharing it with any colleagues who couldn't make it with us live today. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Manesh Patel, who is a manager on Armanino's Intacct team. Manesh is a certified Intacct implementation consultant with knowledge in various ERP systems, Concur, Basecamp, and Dropbox. He has experience on the from the core assurance team at Ernst & Young and at technology companies such as startups like Livebox. We also have Brenda Kaler with us today. Brenda is also a manager on the Intacct team here at Armanino. She has over 15 years of accounting experience in Big Four public accounting and in-house as a controller. Prior to joining the Armanino team, she led an Intacct implementation for a $50 million nonprofit operating in over 20 countries. It's great to have you both with us here today, and with that, I'm going to press the presentation over to Manesh to get us started.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everyone. Looking forward to going through release number 4 with Intacct. So our agenda is going to be kind of around payment automation. We'll talk through project accounting. As you all know, projects has been a big focus on the past 3 or 4 releases, so you'll see some good updates there. We also talked about contracts in our last release. This one also has some new updates that we can share with you. And then, as per kind of the usual themes, administration, workflow updates with regards to AP/AR have also been constant. And then we'll talk through some other enhancements. So to kick us off, let's go ahead and talk through payment automation. So as we all recall, and we have been talking about this for the past few quarters, American Express has established a relationship with Intacct. And for many of our clients who utilize the Intacct check delivery services, you kind of understand the flow. When you're going through your payment process and AP, selecting bills to pay, the payment method that you can typically choose from is Intacct check delivery. When you go through the appropriate payment approvals, then Intacct will then transmit that information to American Express, and then those checks can then be printed, mailed out, and sent to your vendors. So that was a feature that was introduced a while back. In addition to that, the ACH feature was introduced, and now in this latest release, American Express has introduced the corporate card payment service. So what that means is very, very similar to what I had just mentioned. The only key difference is the payment method is actually going to appear as American Express corporate card, and what that will allow you to do is actually let's just say I had a vendor, and we'll talk about what vendor match does, but let's just say I had a vendor, Dell, and I've requested to buy 10 different laptops, and I wanted to actually put those 10 laptops on my American Express card. Well, on the vendor payment screen, we'll be able to select that as a payment method. When we go through the appropriate payment approvals, then that's going to then transmit to American Express to essentially use your card to pay that bill. So this is just a little overview. You've seen this before. The only thing that has been added here is American Express. Now, what happens with the validation process for any of our clients that are utilizing Intacct check delivery services? It's very, very similar. You'll have the ability to run a vendor match, and in this case, the vendor match is actually performed by American Express, and it's a few clicks of a button where you'll be able to go in, run the match, and what American Express will do is validate whether that vendor can be paid via American Express. So some vendors may accept certain credit cards, so this is why that's done. And what's nice about it is you'll get a report that says, hey, these are the ones that were matched, these are the ones that were not matched, and here are the ones that actually need some additional information. So very, very similar to the vendor matching for Intacct check delivery services. It kind of works the same way. And this little snapshot here kind of gives you, shows you exactly what came about, and then you can go in and download the report from here. So we talked through this a little bit, but I thought I'd give you a few instructions. If you do have American Express corporate card payment services, part of it is really similar to the check delivery in that it's the vendor match will actually run offline. You'll go to AP, open setup if you've got those rights, and then actually go in and run the vendor match. And then once it's complete, you'll get an email. Once that email is received, then you'll be able to download that report through that previous screen that I showed you. The other nice area that has been updated is vendor payment services is now a part of the custom report wizard, and we've all been noticing this as well. There have been several different objects that have been exposed, or data sources that have been exposed in the custom report wizard. Many of our clients want to know exactly how they've paid their bills and what is the exact payment method for those bills. So in this example here, you can see that there's a report we created where we've got a bunch of transactions, and then the payment method and the payment status is now exposed. So we can see exactly how we paid the bill and whether it was actually paid or not. And if it was failed, then you can go in and resubmit and or update the vendor's record. So nice to be able to see that these data sources are just continuing to be added over the course of the next few releases.
All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is a few updates to project accounting. The first update is related to billing control. So in line with the new spend control options that were unveiled in Release 3 for 2016, with the spend control, it prevents the input of something that is over a project budget from the purchasing module, so at the start of a workflow. So currently with the spend control option, you can have multiple invoices that together have may exceed your spend control on the project. And that was an intentional design by Intacct to allow the approver of the purchase order to pick and choose which one that they want to approve. However, when you get that, if more than one gets approved, you now risk overbilling your project because you have multiple invoices from the purchasing module that are now being converted into AP bills to be paid. So this is kind of a response to that option here on the billing control. So now this is once it has been converted into a bill and you go to and paid it and you go to add it to a project billing. And this would be most common if you were doing like a time and expense contract and you wanted to make sure that your billings on the project did not exceed the negotiated price. You can decide whether or not you want to include employee expenses. So that will include expenses coming from the time and expense module, from accounts payable, and from purchase order. So that would be in the case where you are only billing the time was the agreed upon fixed fee and expenses were being billed separately to your fixed fee. So you do have that option to exclude expenses from that. If you are billing a totally inclusive fixed fee project, you would want to leave that unchecked. And you can decide whether or not you want to warn, in which case it'll flash that yellow warning sign at the top if you do add a bill to a project billing that goes over the budget. So the good part about that is once you go over budget, you do have line item control. So if you have said that you want to prevent billings altogether over that project amount, you can change or delete line items from that bill so that your project billing does not exceed the agreed upon maximum. So in that instance, then you can go back, you can negotiate a change order if needed to make sure that you can continue billing those other items that were coded to your budget. So this happens when you preview the invoice. It also happens if you process offline. Additionally, one last thing, the module is also currency aware and will translate any project billings that are in a different currency. It will translate them into the currency you're billing in. And then the last thing to note is for offline batches. So if you're processing invoices and project billings offline, it will skip over anything that exceeds the budget if you have opted to deny billings. So you will have to check your log to make sure that you didn't have anything that was skipped over due to exceeding that contract maximum. So the next update to projects in this release is an update to the general ledger post date. So what this means is it automatically selects the next open period for posting. So what this will prevent is if you have a timesheet that spans a month-end period and you want to make sure it goes into the following period, now it is automatically going to select the open period for that. So if you've closed your books on the 5th and the period ends on the 8th, you want it to be billed into the next period. So what this will result in is timesheets begin and end date are much more accurate, and it also makes it easier to make corrections to timesheets that may have spanned a period there. Awesome. So this other last, actually there's 2 more updates for this, but we now have editable timesheets. So previously for users without the projects module, timesheets had to be completed and submitted in one session. So that was unreasonable and a little bit difficult for people to keep their time on a daily basis if that was the case. They had to keep it offline in some other sort of tool or spreadsheet and then translate it into Intacct once the period was closed, which does create a little bit of double work for your teams. So now you can track time whenever you like on a daily basis, or even just keep it open and do it hourly. Save your timesheet as a draft and come back later to complete it and submit it. So this gives users a lot more flexibility to be able to not complete their timesheets in one sitting. Those of you that have the projects module, you've always had this ability, but for those of you that do not, this is a very welcome update. Okay, so leveraging dimension groups for project management. So this is also a very welcome update. So previously, you could not search or manage timesheets, resource schedules, or search for resources by a department, location, project, or any other dimension group. So now that ability has been added to these items in the project module. So we've got the ability to do managing timesheets and also in resource search. So you can also search by employee groups. So this is really important if you're using Intacct project scheduling to manage your business, very common for professional services. And it really allows you to get that flexibility to make sure that you've got people scheduled on your projects that have the right skill sets because you have the ability now to group your employees in that manner.
Great. So the next area that has been of focus is the contracts module, and I think the trend for our last release was around usage-based revenue recognition. So if we kind of hone in on that, some of the updates around the latest release are around fixed pricing, better flexibility around that, as well as some additional capabilities on renewals. So it's basically like catching the contracts wave. Now, historically, managing fixed fees has been a very manual process on contracts. So you have to actually go in, enter the amounts, the units, and then essentially have it go through the contract maintenance is what typically takes a bunch of time. So what Intacct has released is a fixed fee price list where you can actually do a one-time setup essentially and be able to set up that price list so then you can then apply it to any of your actual contracts. So good updates there. We'll talk through how some of these fixed fee arrangements have been updated, how proration works, any kind of upgrades, any downgrades, and then we'll also walk through those areas around renewals that I had mentioned as well. So the first piece of the fixed pricing updates, the nice thing about it is you can have the system calculate what the automatic proration is. So let's just say where you had a contract and there was a downgrade or some type of an upgrade. What you can essentially put into the system within that contract line is the amount of that upgrade or downgrade, and then what Intacct will do is give you what that actual downgrade or upgrade should have been. And so as you can see in this little box here, it says, okay, that actual upgrade results in $511.11. If you wanted to, you can override that suggestion for the for that prorated price by entering it in that box on the left-hand side, or you can go in and say, yeah, this is exactly what I was expecting, and it's as a result of that upgrade or downgrade. The formula that Intacct uses is fixed price times the days in a contract line term divided by the days in the default term. So it's kind of the standard formula for proration. So the nice thing here is it gives you an example and gives you the amount. Some other areas that have been updated as well. Now, typically the last release, this applied to all the usage-based pricing. Now it all applies to the fixed fee pricing. So the nice thing is one-time fees, any fixed quantity rates per unit, fixed fees with fixed quantity rate per unit, and any kind of discounts are going to be supported by the revenue schedules. So basically what you got with usage-based pricing applies itself with the fixed pricing as well. Some updates with respect to renewals. So, typically how renewal works outside of just standard contracts, if I had an order that was placed and it went through the sales process, then I can go in and say, well, I need to put a reminder in to renew this particular contract maybe 10 days before the start of the new contract. Well, typically we would wait until that renewal period to go in and process that. However, what Intacct released is Renewal On-Demand. So you don't actually have to wait. You get a little bit of flexibility to go and do something outside of the system scheduler. So, technically if you didn't want to wait for that renewal confirmation, then you can actually go in and say, well, this contract, I know it's got to renew. I'm going to go ahead and click more actions on the top right and actually renew it on demand. There are as well a few different sets of flexibilities for what the renewal amounts should be. So as you can see in this example, let's just say that first year contract is $1,000 per year. However, the next 2 years after that are going to be $1,000, $1,050. So you can actually go into a renewal tab within the contract and put in what those renewal amounts should be in advance. So nice thing is when you're going through and then clicking more actions and renewing on demand, it's going to look at this renewal amount. So the ability to customize renewal prices is a latest part of this release. The other area that was updated with respect to renewals is actually putting that into the state as a state. So you see that renewal only box that's in red. 2 of these lines are in progress. So this was originally a part of the contract. And now you have the ability to have a renewal state. And what that does, well, one, it's reportable. So you can report off of your renewal only states. The other thing that's nice about it is it doesn't affect what the original contract did with the GL. So you can add all the billing, all the revenue, any kind of expense information. All that information essentially can be stored and not impact the original contract. So nice to be able to see that as well and have a different state for those. Areas around administration that have been updated. we've probably all seen these, and actually the next few updates, you definitely have seen these. So I'll kind of walk through them in a little bit of detail, but the first area is enhanced password security. So if you've taken a look at your company information recently, and actually through most of our clients' implementations, we won't recommend, we'll probably be a little bit more conservative in terms of how you can reuse your prior passwords. So what Intacct did to increase security even further is no longer reuse the last 3 or more passwords you created. So you see this little box that it's been added under the minimum length. You can actually go in and specify that or prevent that reuse of the previous passwords. So once again, another area where a business user with administrative privileges, access to updating company information, can go in and actually make some of those edits. Follow the audit trail. So many of our clients as well, if you've gone through an implementation or even are in implementation mode right now, we'll always install an audit log, which an audit log is going to track who did what in your system, and an access log is going to track who came in when in your system. What Intacct introduced is an audit trail, and they organized it a little bit better. So as you can see, this is a sample snapshot that we took. Shows you a date stamp, what action was completed, was something modified, was it something involving the workflow, who actually completed it. Previously in that audit log gives you like the user ID, but it's nice that we can see the name of the person, and then the source of where that edit was made. So was it in the user interface, or was it some type of import or through an API? So that audit trail is a new feature available. Typically you'll look at audit trails for transactional records, and you'll be able to see exactly what has been updated. So nice to not have to go to a log. You can actually see it pretty much on demand. How do you get there? Well, you can go into more actions and actually view that audit trail, and you can then see exactly what happened with that transaction, and then get the kind of the rundown. We're already used to seeing a history. This does differ than just a standard history. So if I were looking at like a journal entry, for example, I can click on the history tab and see exactly when a user created it, posted it, approved it. But what this does is give you a little bit more insight outside of that audit log that we install for you. There's also been some updates. You've definitely seen this because it's way past November 1st. But in the Intacct community, which is where you can go in and ask questions, log new ideas, log a support case, connect with colleagues, communicate with colleagues. This community went in and essentially the user name format changed. So it's going to be firstname.lastname at intacctcommunity.com. If you have logged into the Intacct community, then you've already seen this because the change has been made across all users. But if you haven't already, then that's the credentials to actually log into that Intacct community. And just for folks who haven't logged in before yet or aren't leveraging it, it's definitely a great area, especially with respect to looking at the knowledge base. So find myself as well always looking in there. In a cloud-based system, there's new releases and new updates happening all the time. So it's nice to be able to see different presentations and different accounting information as well updated on there. So let's just say I needed to look at the knowledge base and see exactly what was going to happen with cash-based accounting and how the system's going to react when we were to create new transactions. What exactly happened? So knowledge base is very, very popular, and the big update here is just new community usernames. Purchase Reqs for your eyes only. So this is also an area that actually has been a nice area of focus amongst purchasing. So for example, if we step back a little bit, you get roles in a role-based environment, and some of the past releases have allowed you to restrict whether a purchasing transaction document gets entered or converted. So let's just say I don't want somebody to create a PO unless there is a purchase requisition that goes along with it and is approved. So there's been some areas that you can actually go in and restrict some of those purchasing documents. That's already been a part of it. And the nice thing about that in the past releases, you've been able to restrict certain users from seeing certain purchasing documents. So let's just say I was using the purchasing module for any kind of AP invoice routing. I now know that only this select few groups of folks will be able to see, let's just say, the unapproved invoice related to legal counsel. So what has been updated in this release is what employee users can actually see which purchase recs. So even further, more granularity around, mostly the requisitions that are around any kind of legal or compliance changes where you're like, hey, this particular employee user should not be able to see this style of purchase requisitions. So it reduces the number of documents that show up in that person's queue. So once again, purchasing is going to continue to refine itself and be accessible to a little bit more stricter internal controls. Okay, next up is going to be the workflow updates. So as we all have noticed so far, if you haven't been in the vendor's record recently, there's actually three contacts that we've been used to: the primary contact, the pay to contact, and the return to contact. So typically for your vendors, unless they all differ, you can have a separate contact for each style of who you actually need to communicate with. What Intacct added was a 1099 contact. So when you're actually going in and printing forms, it's going to default and allow you to default to that original 1099 contact. And that 1099 contact may be different from the primary contact of the vendor, the pay to, maybe the AP department for that vendor, and even the return to. So just a new contact record field has been added within each vendor's record. Also, we have a few new additions to the custom views. So for example, this is just showing a little breakdown of the employees list and how you can actually go in and customize the employees view to show what particular employees 1099 name, employees 1099 type has been selected. Mostly if you do track 1099s for your employees, this would be a feature that you would utilize where you can actually just go and customize the list and look at it in a better way. The other update that I don't have a slide for in here, but I think it's going to be critical is the 1099s that you've previously been used to setting up is typically like one per vendor, right? We'll have a default form type and we'll say, well, this is a 1099 miscellaneous is the default for this particular vendor, and here's their name. And then when you're going in and printing your 1099 forms, then it's going to default to that box. Well, now in this latest update, you now have the ability on a transactional level to change or update that 1099 box information. So let's just say you have a transaction that maybe is applicable with 1099 miss, but also could be applicable to another box. You don't have to actually set up separate vendors for that. So good updates, and I think you'll be able to kind of clearly see it, right, Brenda?
Yeah, just in time for 1099 season.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And actually, to go along with that, for 1099 season, in AP, you have the ability to generate that 1099 report, make sure you understand it and say, whether things were coded correctly to the right spots, run that report, and then through Intacct, you should be able to print those 1099 forms as well. So report first, then printing forms. And this is nice to be able to see as well. You've already seen this as well. If you do utilize manual checks, or you have utilized manual checks in your environment. Manual checks, the business case for them has been typically that you've done your payment run already, but let's just say you get a collections notice from FedEx, and they say, hey, you haven't paid this bill yet. We need to have you pay this bill as soon as possible before it's sent to collections. Well, outside of the standard payment process, manual checks has given you the ability to create one on the go, debit your expense, credit AP, debit AP, credit cash, all in one step. And you can then save and confirm if you have an actual check that you wrote up, or save and print and actually print that check from the system. So that's historically what manual checks have done. Intacct actually renamed this to be called manual payments. So doesn't necessarily have to follow that standard business case of a check. Now that it's manual payment, you can actually use something like a record transfer as your payment method. And let's just say it was a wire that needed to go out that had it an all-in-one step. So as you can see here, the payment method is now exposed, so it's not just check. Your transaction amount obviously has to tie out to the entries amount, and it will follow the same accounting. So you've seen this if you've got the roles in your environment, and it's now going to be called manual payments, accessible in AP and also accessible in cash.
Awesome. And now we have just a few other enhancements, grouping together those items that didn't fall in any one of the previous categories. So the big update here is for those of you using AvaTax to calculate your sales tax, we now have the ability to put in latitude and longitude coordinates. So this is useful for when a postal address doesn't exist, either you're in a very rural area, or maybe you have an oil derrick or something out in the ocean, a property or a resource generation site that doesn't really fall into the standard address. This is really helpful for being able to calculate that sales tax determination where an address doesn't exist easily. So you can specify this for the ship to contact, and Intacct will send the coordinates to AvaTax when you've configured your Avalara integration to use the coordinates. You have to have them specified on the contact value, and it has to be associated with a particular customer. Currently, this only works when the coordinates are within the United States. And to configure it, you'll go through the subscriptions module to configure Avalara Tax, and then to add the latitude and longitude coordinates, they're now available if you go under company and then to contacts. You can edit to change an existing contact or add a new one. The latitude and longitude boxes are on the mailing information tab, and you can specify the value in decimal degrees, and it does go out to a full 8 decimal places. So that'll be a welcome addition for those of you calculating sales tax. Also, building off the enhancement that was done in the last release, allowing a per transaction summary for bills, invoices, and adjustments. Now we have the ability to do a per transaction summary for payments on both accounts payable and accounts receivable. Further, you can also specify whether you want it to be one per payment or if you want it to be per bank or per payment method as well. If you choose one per payment, you don't need to check those boxes, but if you are grouping it up still on daily or monthly, we also have the ability to do per bank and per payment method. So the help for this is not only for a shorter summary frequency to be able to speed up processing, but also when you're running reports for your budget owners. Previously, it would show the batch information, and now that it's being quote-unquote summarized in one per payment, you now have access to that information and won't have to drill through. So previously in this release, Intacct had told us that they were going to be changing foreign exchange rate providers as of December 1st of this year. Because of the pushback received from customers and partners, having this big change go out 1 month before the majority of the clients' year end, this has been delayed. At this time, no change has been made to the existing Intacct daily rate provider, and there's no changes in the product behavior. Currently, we are not aware of when this will be actually released. And the last update under other enhancements, for those of you using platform services, we now have the ability to edit the lookup field for a standard object in a relationship between a custom object and a standard object. For example, between the attendee custom object and the standard customer object. So the benefit to this is you can change the field label as well as the integration name. Previously you could not for the standard objects lookup field. Even more importantly, you can prevent the field value from being duplicated if the record is duplicated. This is important because previously when you duplicated a record, it would quote unquote steal the relationship, and this theft would occur when the field was part of a one-to-one relationship or on the one side of a one-to-many relationship. So now it will allow you to rename that relationship uniquely so that it does not steal that relationship and prevent you from processing as intended. So in conclusion, there have been significant updates to payment automation, project accounting, contracts, administration, workflow updates, and then our other enhancements.
Thank you, Manesh and Brenda. And we do have a few questions today, but of course, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to submit them in the chat box at the bottom of your console, and we'll definitely get to those. And of course, I will provide you guys with Brenda and Manesh's contact information, as always. So if you do have any questions for them after today's webinar, you're always welcome to reach out as well. So our first question up, is the audit trail on record level data so I can see it if anyone has made any changes?
Yes, I can take that one. That's a good question. So yeah, typically that history has been available on transactional level data. It is available on record level data too now. So if you went and let's just say you clicked on more actions under a customer's record, then you can actually view that audit trail and see what changes were made to that customer's record. So nice to be able to see that translating itself not to just transactional detail.
And sticking on the audit trail theme, do you have to be an admin to access this audit trail?
The audit trail is actually a part of your role. So just accessing the standard permissions, as long as you have access to looking at like the customer's or the vendor's record, then you should have access to that trail. So technically, if I didn't, let's just say I was an AR specialist and I didn't see anything that was happening in AP, and I didn't have a chance to look at vendors, then I obviously would not be able to look at the audit trail for vendors. But in this case, as an AR specialist, I can look at customers, I can look at invoice audit trails. So it's actually just a part of the role that you have.
Thanks, Manesh. And our last question for today, actually, what if a vendor needs to receive more than one type of login?
So like what if a vendor goes in and what if a vendor needs to receive more than one type of login? I assume that's related to the payment automation. So technically, let's just say that actually it's actually related to, I was going to say it's actually related to 1099. So
sorry, I guess that one might have come in a little earlier in the webinar here.
Yeah. So I think that's related to 1099. So what do I mean by that? Typically, when we've set up the vendor's records, if you do have one 1099, that it applies to, then you can actually go in and say, well, this rent vendor should just be applicable to the 1099 box related to rent. But maybe that rent vendor also did some other business with you that was related to another 1099 box. So you would actually typically have to set up another vendor record for that same vendor, just so the 1099 prints correctly. Now you only need one vendor record. So I think I understood that question.
Thanks, Manesh. And we actually did get one more in. So for the Amex ACH payments, what type of remittance information does the vendor receive?
That's a good question. So when you're going in and we can always confirm this as well, Megan, but typically with like check delivery service related to American Express, you'll get or that vendor will get access to everything on that check stub. So the description or the invoice number. In addition to that, if you did have a reference number on that particular bill or some type of reference information, then they would be able to see that. And then just kind of the basic details. I assume ACH works the same way, but we should be able to confirm that on our end. And so Megan, I think we'll be able to go in and let you know exactly what fields are exposed.
Perfect. Thanks, Manesh. Well, that does wrap up today's Q&A session. So Brenda and Manesh, thank you very much for being our presenters today. As I mentioned, both Manesh and Brenda's contact info is up on the screen, but I will be sending you all the link to our slides as well as a link to the on-demand recording of today's webinar, so you can access it after this, or of course share it with any colleagues that weren't able to join us today. As you exit today's webinar, there is a quick survey, so definitely take a moment to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar, and thank you all very much for your time, and enjoy your 17 minutes back here, everyone. Have a great day.